This one, we haven't done the shutters on one of these yet. This is the Retinette F, and it looks very much the same as one of these. At first glance you'd think you're looking at much the same thing. There's no light value on the shutter. The f-stops are at the top, but you'll notice something interesting there. We already know the French Retinette had an Angeno lens, not a Schneider lens. But look at the f-stop range here. On the French camera, f3.5 here, f16 there. On the traditional worldwide production or worldwide sold cameras, f3.5's on this side, f22 on the other. So the body castings here are not the same thing, or at least they've been engraved quite differently. So that's interesting for a start. So this French one, let's have a look at that. Features much the same otherwise as the earlier Retinettes here. It's got the small chrome disc on the top here so that the frame count is easily knocked. Very similar here, the film reminder dial is flat on the top. This one's in French. Let's have a look at this. What have we got for the shutter? No manufacturer marked for the shutter. We've just got the Kodak name at the bottom. And their shutter speeds are B through to a 2/50th of a second. Whereas the Compur Rapid shutter was B through to a 500th of a second. The speed divisions are different. We have the later speed divisions on the Compur Rapid 1, 2, 4, 8, 15, 30, 60, 125, 250 and 500. And we have the older style here 1, 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, 100, 250. So you would say it was an older design or more primitive shutter. I think you'd probably say that and get away with it. Let's see about removing the shutter from the camera. Well, looking in the back there, I can see that the retainer ring is most definitely not the same as that used on the Compur Rapid shutters. I'll see if my tool will engage with that and get that out. The rear lens group is sitting at pretty much the same height as the bottom of that notch. So we'll find out. Yeah, that's working nicely. That rear lens group came loose at the same time, so it must be a fairly snug fit in there. I don't think it's going to fall off the back of the shutter, but we'll find out. The retaining ring is aluminium by the looks of it. Let's get this out anyway. Let's have a look at that retaining ring. Yes, the retaining ring is aluminium. It's quite a bit of metal there. And here's the shutter. It's a lift-off housing on the outside, it is, and in that way it's similar to that used on the Compur shutters. Now this little piece here, what did that drop off? I think that was part of the shutter cocking. Was it the release? It may have been part of the shutter cocking mechanism. Did it sit there like that? I don't know, that's a bit of a mystery. I dare say we'll find out. Let's put this case back on here, see how that looks. And how does that cocked in the camera body? Let's have a look at the camera body, see how this couples. So in the camera body we've got a cocking position at the top there, and we have an arm sticking out here to release the shutter. But the cocking action is that much the same. There's a lot of slop there. I suspect that the mechanism at this point might be slightly different in the body. But the cocking arm, oh there, yeah, that's the release. That must drop through there. No, this is weird. Okay, so what if that sat there like that, and the case sat on there like that, and in the slot at the back there, that's where the shutter release arm on that camera body would sit, and that would just press down and transmit the action to the shutter release on the shutter. That's something that's worth testing, I suppose, if I can find the cocking tool. So let's try this. That's definitely cocked, and what I suspect is that that thing sat there like that, and that wedge shape there is where the shutter release picked it up, and the shutter release comes in from the back. Let's see if that will release. Let's find a nice fine screwdriver tip. That was it. So this little piece simply sat on the back like that, and the arm of the shutter release on the camera body dropped into that slot, and that's what released the shutter. Okay, so far so good. The mysteries are being exposed. The rear group, well, that can come out now. That should only be finger tight really on a good day, and it came loose when I was unscrewing the retaining ring. The shutter does have a number engraved on the back of it there, hand engraved. Looks like 76767. Interesting sort of a number. Let's take the front group off. 3 small screws. That, of course, is reminiscent to the lenses on the other Retinettes. But that's a common arrangement for most front self-focusing cameras. Okay, so there's our focus scale ring. The stop, often you have the stop on the shutter, and you might have a block or something in here. Here we've got 2 screws forming the stops to stop that from unscrewing all the way. Let's put that to one side. The front group will unscrew. It's a 45mm f3.5 lens. The Schneiders, if I can find one here, yeah, that one, with the same f3.5 45mm. Our front group, or our middle group, is screwed in there. This was a triplet design by the looks of it. See if this will unscrew without a fight. Yes, just. So we know we have an Angino lens. The only name on the shutter appears to be Kodak, but then it was quite normal for camera manufacturers to have their name on the shutter as well, just on the nameplate. And frequently the shutter manufacturer's name would be there too. Okay, so the front cover here, that should lift off. Bit stiff. It lifts off. Now this piece here just acts as a tension ring, if you like. That just applies a bit of pressure at this point so this isn't slopping about. This little square hole here couples to this pin here. That locates it probably. It's probably a location pin. We take the speed settings cam plate off. It looks fairly conventional. Underneath here, what have we got? Well, here's our release mechanism down here. This is the little cocking segment at the top. There's a spring here and here which would provide the impetus to fire the shutter. They're your main springs for all practical purposes. See if I put the cocking tool on the back without disturbing anything too much. Let's see if we can cock this without everything flying away. No, not today. It's quite a strong spring. Oh, that was the cocking piece flying away into the distance. Fortunately, I've got it back. Okay, so let's just put this back where it was. Let's and take note of where things are before stuff starts flying around the room. Okay. So there we are, that's sitting in the neutral position, if you like. That's released, it's not cocked. When you cock it, this piece rotates, it pulls this whole lever across, which drops this tag here, releases our retard gear train. So this tab here would come back to about this point. When the piece here, the release would drop in here and lock this in position, and when you push this button that would shift that out, allow that to unwind. This tab on this internal cocking rack would act against this piece, forcing the action of the speed train to run down, and presumably once it had run down, that would free up whatever method is used to swing the shutter blades open and closed again. So, worth making sure that we have a good idea how this is assembled. and I'll get a few still shots, I think, for my own purposes. Okay, let's take a few pieces off this now. Well, we know that this little cocking shaft comes out, and it's fairly sprung loaded even at rest position. This curved cocking rat piece here, we'll lift that out. Now, the spring hooks into there, and the other side of this piece there's another spring that hooks into there. This would be considered probably your main drive spring. That can probably stay there for the moment. I don't see any need to disassemble that. This piece here controls the blades. Now we have two shutter blades, and they swing out from each other like this and back again. That's not an uncommon arrangement for, I'd say, fairly primitive shutters, to have two blades. This little shaft here, that lifts out. That's our cocking shaft. And this little piece here sat on top of that cocking shaft. Like that. Okay, so we know what that piece does. We know what this piece does, and it can lift out from the shutter. So this lever arrangement here controls the blades opening and closing. The spring here we can leave in place because there's no special reason to take that off. Although it looks to me like you could lift this whole thing straight off the post and unhook the spring. So it wouldn't be a problem to unhook that. The shutter release here. What have we got? Okay, so there's a lever here pivoting at this point on that screw. It's got quite a strong spring behind it. That's your shutter release. It acts on... No, it doesn't have any spring behind it. The only spring is on this lever here. The tail of the spring is tucked up behind this point, and it runs round the other end of the main spring here for this release. One end of it acts on the side of that lever there, and the other end is around the back of the post that this little lever sits on. And presumably it's up against the post. I presume there's a post there. It might just be like a standoff that becomes loose if you take that screw out. There's also another spring here, a much lighter spring. And that must be the return spring for something. But I'm looking to see what. It acts against... Oh, is this 3 levers? Yeah. So we've got this lever, which is activated from the shutter release in the body, and this thing is 2 pieces. This outer piece here, that's the one with a strong spring acting against it, and this other one has a lighter spring acting on it, which also terminates against that end of the arm there, and presumably acts on this smaller lever somewhere under here, by the looks of it. Alright, so take note of that. If you're taking one of these shutters apart, get in and take photos of these things so that you know where those springs attached. Because otherwise it'll be a bit of a bother and a nuisance to get them right. So we certainly have one lever here on the retard gear train, which would act against the cam surfaces there. There's another lever at this point which also activates, but when? It lifts out completely there. I think it disconnects the pallets or something at this end of the speed train, probably for the faster shutter speeds. Yes, that looks right. So when you select the faster shutter speeds, it disconnects something in the gear train here, the pallets presumably. If I hold that back with my finger and try swinging this, it's much freer. You've got the gears and the pallet wheel turning, but presumably not the pallets. And if I let this drop back in, you can see that there's quite a bit more engagement there. So this lifts the pallets out of contact. What have we got in the way of adjustments? Well, this is fixed to the base plate with one screw here and one screw here. I don't know whether there's any adjustment with that speed train inwards and outwards. It would only be relative to these notches here that you were moving things. There is a little plate here with a single screw. Now that's got a slot in that plate, and that little plate changes the position of the pallets, the engagement of the pallets, so that if this plate was moved outwards, it would swing this out slightly and you would have less engagement of the pallets and presumably faster speeds. And if you move this thing inwards, it would allow this to swing in more and you get greater engagements with the pallets for slower speeds. So I think that's our speed adjustment there. Right, well, let's move a few things off this shutter. Can we get this off here? It's not enthusiastic. See if I can get that spring off the other end. Yeah, that's coming off. That's off. Okay, so now that comes off. There's its spring. The speed train, I can see one screw there. There's another number engraved on the base plate here. 76767. So this mechanism plate, if you like, matches the engraving on the housing. So it's interesting that they felt the need to mark parts like that. Let's take the speed train out, the retard gear train. We've got a screw at this end. There's a screw at this end. Now there's a spring around that screw at this end. I think it's probably a shoulder screw. I'm going to unhook that spring from that arm there. Right, that spring and its screw have come loose. And see if the speed train lifts out now. It does. This shutter's interesting. It doesn't look like it's descended from a Gaussier shutter or a Compur shutter. Okay, so our release over here, the mechanism there, see if I can unhook some of that. We've got two springs here. I'll unhook that strong spring if I can and see if I can lift this lever off. It's very strong. Might need two pairs of tweezers for this. I wonder if I can unhook the other end of it. No, got to get that down and out. Okay, I've lifted that up enough that it's just about out of the housing. I've got to be careful at this point that I don't have springs zooming away across the room. Okay, so there's our main spring. It's quite a beefy looking one. It's also got a bit of a wiggle in it at that point, and possibly there too, which usually is an indication that something's been hand shaped, if you like. And here's our spring on the against the smaller lever, and these two levers, it looks like they're riveted onto the same shaft. That doesn't lift off there, does it? I don't know if that lever will lift off that shaft. It won't. So this is together as a unit, and its spring is fairly simple. It comes up against the post at this end, and it comes up against this arm on the smaller, lighter section at that end. Okay, so there's nothing flying to pieces there. We've got our release here, which is probably just sitting up on that post. I don't think there's anything under there, and I think that most likely that's on a post that's riveted to the mechanism plate. This is our flash connection here. Now that's an odd one. I'm not sure what that is. It might be a PC connection, but it's a funny looking one. I'm looking to see how it's constructed. We can take our moving contact out. We can probably leave this thing on the shutter. The moving contact is held to a plate here, and there's a screw through from the outside that holds it in place, and it might be clamping it in place. There's the piece that was clamping it in place. There's the screw from the outside of the shutter, and here is the moving contact. Okay, so what I'm doing, of course, is I am removing obstructions that prevent us from opening the shutter up to clean the shutter blades, assuming that the shutter blades need cleaning. And the diaphragm blades, probably they're contained in the back of the case here in much the same way as the early Compur, except it's got 5 blades, of course. The setting ring here is certainly held in with screws from inside. So I'm looking to see if there's anything bearing against the inside of the case that I need to be aware of. I'm thinking particularly of springs that were pushing against the case, and I'm not seeing anything. So what screws have we got holding things together here? Well, there's certainly one here, one there, and it looks like this one here is a 3rd screw. There's nothing from the back of the shutter that we've got access to, so it would have to be screws from the inside of the shutter. This is a different shaped screw. It's countersunk, and I presume that is so that it clears the flash contact. Okay, I'm going to tip this upside down, and hopefully that mechanism plate will fall out or come out with a bit of a wriggle. It comes out with a bit of a wriggle. There we go. There's our mechanism plate. There's our 2 blades. And you can see that as that lever operates, those blades swing out, open up the shutter, and as it comes back it closes them again. So if these blades have got any oil or anything on them, they'll be sticky. They won't move correctly, they won't move smoothly or as quickly as they otherwise should. So I'm looking at the shape of these blades, and I can lift this one off. That's the blade that's on the top, and I'm watching to see which orientation that blade's in. This is the other blade, the first blade that went on. So here on the mechanism plate we only have this left here now. That's actually two little levers, and they're held together with a spring. But they're held together with a single screw in the middle, so they're running on a common pivot. The mechanism plate here, it needs cleaned. There's grease and dirt around the outside there. Of course, the surface we're most interested in is this underside here against the shutter blades. This surface underneath would need to be very clean and grease free so that the shutter blades don't stick. Let's get back to the shutter case. This is the piece with the diaphragm blades in it. It's comparatively crude. The diaphragm blades don't have rivets on them forming the pivot points. Those are what you refer to as a plunged hole. That's where a conical or a blunt punch is pushed through the metal so that it forces it up, so that around the edges of the hole in those blades it's pushed the metal up, and the edges of that pushed up bit are what run in these slots. I would regard that as a method that was likely to make something that had a very limited life. I have seen it used before. It's not very exciting. It would have been cheap, and I think that most likely it's not a good choice. So let's have a look at this mechanism here. What have we got? I'll get another picture of this, a still one for my... No, I don't need to, I've got a good video here. I just want to make sure I know which way around those blades go for when I'm trying to get this thing back together again. I expect that the blades are all the same. But anyway, so our setting lever on the back here is held in with two screws, these two screws here. That's reminiscent of early compours. They're probably shoulder screws, I would think. That one was certainly not tight. Okay, so there's our setting lever free from the body. I can probably tip the diaphragm out. What have we got? Well, we've got this plate here. It has the blade sitting on it. And yeah, they're riveted in. So those pivots are riveted in there or folded over so they won't come out. So those blades won't separate. We can fold them out. See that blade, the tip of that blade's bent up. It's not a good look at all. We can probably fold these blades outwards in order to clean them. But this is somewhat crude. There's oil on these blades too, I can see it at that point. Alright, see if I can get in here with another pair of tweezers to hold this. And I will want to straighten up the tip of that blade slightly. When we fold these back in, they've all got to be folded in, overlapping each other like normal diaphragm blades. The tip at this point is a stray bit of metal in there. I don't know whether that's the edge folded over or not. Okay, so there's the diaphragm blades anyway. They certainly need cleaning. And the tip here, see if I can get that. Yeah, you can see it there when I move it around. You can see the change in the light there, the reflection. That's bent at that end. That would have made it probably stiffer to work, so I'll put that to one side. That's our diaphragm. And here we have the case with virtually nothing in it now but the flash contact. This is the moving plate, the piece that was connected to the settings plate, settings lever, and that swung those blades inwards and outwards. This is dirty and dusty looking. I expect that's oxidation of the surface I'm mostly seeing there. There is a pattern on this, but I can't tell whether it's the impression of thousands of thumbprints or whether it's something embossed on the surface. And this surface again looks pretty grimy. It is plated in some fashion, but the plating is thin or stained or corroded away. And the screws that held that together, they were shoulder screws. The case, well, there's not much to say about it. It's just a fairly, it looks like a nicely machined aluminium case. It's got a big fingerprint in there, a lot of dirt and dust. Looks quite good. Will certainly need to be cleaned. There's a bit of grease and rubbish here that will need to be dealt with. Now it's interesting that these marks around the outside there, they almost look like hand filing marks. They may not be. This may have been, that surface may have been worked on a circular table on a mill or something, but certainly the lines on here are at an unusual angle, and it certainly doesn't look like that was turned on a lathe. So that is just about our shutter completely stripped down. We could take these two levers off the mechanism plate for good measure. Perhaps not. That screw doesn't want to come loose. I'm not fighting with it. I'll just clean that in place with a bit of naphtha and make sure those two pieces work smoothly. Right, that's our shutter, and its control number was 76767. I don't suppose that matches the number on the lens. No, the lens doesn't have a number. That's very interesting. So that is the shutter, completely devoid of manufacturer's name apart from Kodak written on it. So we don't know whether the shutter was a product of Kodak or whether it was made for Kodak, and that the Kodak sign on the front is simply a nice way of badging the camera. I'll have to clean these parts up.